I'm here to talk to you today about the politics of touch, the rules and norms that govern how we as human beings interact and touch each other. And of course, I'm doing this because the leading contender for the Democratic primary, Joe Biden, has had some accusations of inappropriate touching. At least 7 women have come forward and accused him of inappropriate conduct, including a member of the Assembly from Nevada, Lucy Flores, who suggested or alleges that Joe Biden walked up behind her, grabbed her shoulders, smelled her hair, and then kissed her on the back of the head. Now, it's important to note that none of these women have accused Joe Biden of sexual misconduct, just inappropriate touching. And if you've read the news or if you've looked at any of the pictures, you know what this is all about. An instance of Joe Biden nuzzling the neck of a woman, of the Secretary of Defense's wife, and putting his hands on her shoulder for 28 seconds while he was giving a speech. Or the time that Joe Biden kissed Chuck Grassley's wife on the lips. Or the time that he whispered awkwardly in Chris Coons' daughter's ear. Or the time at the Little League World Series in which Joe Biden kissed an usher, also on the lips. More recently, one of the more recent claims or allegations is a woman said that Joe Biden came up to her and put her nose, or his nose against her nose. Come on, Joe. Say it ain't so, Joe, right? You can't rub your nose against another person's nose. You shouldn't be smelling people's hair. This is not hard. But I will say that Biden raises an important question that we as a community, as a political community, should grapple with. That is, how do we determine, how do we understand what is appropriate and inappropriate touch? And that's what I'd like to talk about today, both in terms of the political realm, but also in our day-to-day lives. And I'm going to argue today that I think those worlds blend together more than we think, and in very unique ways. I'm also going to share some other stories of political touch to help put Joe Biden in some context. Now, before we get started, or actually, Joe Biden has responded to this and said, in my many years on the campaign trail and in public life, I've offered countless handshakes, hugs, expression of affection, support, comfort, and not once, never, did I believe I acted inappropriately. If it is suggested I did so, I will listen respectfully, but it was never my intention. Now, it is important to say, and I think our baseline here should be, politics is a tactile business. Politics is all about touch. I mean, think about the terms that we use to describe politics. Glad-handing, backslapping, all the handshaking, the baby kissing, right? Think about another circumstance in which it's appropriate for a person to be kissing random babies. We have people, parents, otherwise reasonable parents, who are flinging their children at politicians for a kiss. If you brought your baby to work and your coworkers started kissing your baby, you would say, "Stop kissing my baby," right? It's pretty clear the babies are not enjoying this experience, right? Think about other forms of touch. Think about the rope line at political events. People stand for hours and hours for a chance to touch and shake the hand of a politician. The State of the Union, politicians wait for hours and hours just to touch the President of the United States. This is something that's deeply ingrained in our politics. A long time ago, I went to a speech by Bill Clinton. After that speech was over, I waited in the rope line to shake his hand. I waited a long time, and then he came by, and I have to say that experience was fairly memorable for me. It was powerful. I remember what Bill Clinton's hand looks like. I remember what the handshake was like. It was soft and delicate. I was assuming it would be like, a hard handshake. It was not. So we shouldn't kid ourselves and assume that touch isn't powerful, because it absolutely is. As an example, I'm going to show you this picture. I know! Of a 5-year-old boy touching the president's head. This 5-year-old boy, his father was on the National Security Council working as a Marine. This is one of his last days. The family got to come in and take a picture with the president. While they were there, the boy turns to the president and says, "Is your hair just like mine?" And the president says, "Why don't you see and touch for yourself?" And the boy hesitates for a second. And then Obama says, "Touch it, dude. Touch my hair." And he does. And we get this iconic photo, this powerful photo where we see a young boy of 5 touching the president's head and probably thinking and realizing that anything is possible. That because my hair is the same as the president, maybe I could be president one day. A powerful, powerful image. Speaking of powerful, I would say the most quintessential form of political touch within the United States is the handshake. The handshake first gained traction in the early 19th century. Interestingly, the British and the French gentlemen, they didn't like the handshake. They said it was sweaty and disgusting. But Americans, we like the handshake. Abe Lincoln was arguably the most prolific handshaker in all of American political history. He shook thousands and thousands of hands. And in fact, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, some noted that his signature wasn't as clear, as sturdy as it normally is. And he said or noted that he'd been shaking hands for hours and hours the morning before. His hands were often swollen, people said, because he shook so many hands. Think about the implication of that. And just as we do now have conversations about appropriate touch, there were conversations about appropriate touch at that time. Harper's Weekly in 1870 had an article talking about the way you should shake a hand. Now, if somebody refused to shake your hand, that was considered a declaration of hostility, and you were no longer friends. If you shook somebody's hand too hard, that was an indication that you had malicious intent. Right? So all of these norms, these silly things about touching really matter. Speaking of handshakes, our president is a wonderful study of handshakes. I argue that there's 4 elements to the Trump handshake, or what we'd call the Trump shake. The first is the grab and squeeze. Trump goes in and grabs your hand and squeeze. Now, he's not grabbing your palm. He's grabbing your knuckles, as you can see as he grabs Justin Trudeau's hand there. So it's not really a handshake as much as it is a knuckle squeeze. It starts there. Then there is the yank, right? So you grab the knuckles, then you suddenly yank the arm back. You can see Gorsuch getting at the beginning of a yank here. You soon are pulled forward into the president, stumbling, losing your balance, right? Think about power there. The third element, the wrist bend and lift. At that point, the president will lift your wrist, bend your wrist and lift it in the air. Finally, there is the palm tap. The president will take his palm and gently tap your hand 3 or 4 times. Now let's think a little bit about what the meaning of this might be. The first 3 steps are very aggressive, very confrontational. The final one is very gentle. Makes you wonder what's going on here. I think he might have defeated you in the first 3, and he's pointing out, nice try, come again. I know what you're saying. Do you have a video, Muck? Yes. All right, I'm going to show you a 19-second handshake that took place between Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, and Donald Trump. And I want you, they're sitting down, but you'll see all of the elements. And I want you to pay particular attention to Shinzo Abe's face at the end of the handshake. There's a jerk, a yank. All right. So what we see is that Shinzo Abe was not used to that kind of handshake. Caught him off guard. He's going, what's going on here? And so we should think about what is intended by that form of political touch. Now, once word of the Trump handshake gets out there, international leaders around the world are much more skeptical of the Trump handshake. They have to think about, is this something I really want to do? Do I want to get caught in the palm tap? And how then you deal with the Trump handshake. My favorite reaction is Justin Trudeau, who decided he was going to come in fast and close, grab the president, and then lock him up on the shoulder, right? He's not going to get yanked. He's not going to have his palm tapped. Justin Trudeau is showing power, right? Emmanuel Macron, he had a different approach. He tried to out-squeeze the squeezer. Right? So he said, if Trump's coming in squeezing and grabbing, I am going to squeeze and grab. Now, look at this. So you can see in the corner there. That's Trump's hand after Macron lets go. He left a permanent mark from his handshake on his hand. All right, now some of this is silly, but also international politics matter. Visuals matter. Touch matters. And here we see an incident where international leaders are trying to use touch to demonstrate their power and their dominance, especially in response to Donald Trump. Now, you'll be happy to know that handshaking isn't the only form of awkward touching that happens in international politics. We also have the kiss, right? So not so much in the United States, but leaders around the world do kiss each other. Sometimes men even kiss each other. One of my favorite all-time political kissers or kisses is the socialist fraternal kiss. This was a greeting among states, heads of state for communist countries. They would come together, men, mostly men, would come together, they would embrace, and then there would be 3 kisses alternating on each cheek, unless those leaders were really close, and then the 3rd kiss was on the lips. Now, the best of all the kissers was Lenin, the Soviet Premier Brezhnev right here. He kissed everybody. And this is a famous kiss with him and Erich Honecker of Eastern Germany. But what's interesting to me is this was not seen as inappropriate or bizarre or different, right? Different culture, different practices. What is fascinating is when Brezhnev and Carter had to come together to sign the SALT Treaty. You suddenly have a culture where men kissing men, political leaders kissing, that normative culture, that's okay. And then you have the American culture where male politicians generally don't kiss each other. What was Carter going to do? What was Brezhnev going to do? Was Brezhnev going to kiss Carter? Would Carter kiss him back? Yes. All right, I have a video. Handshake. Brezhnev goes in. All right. Now what's interesting there is Carter's face. Carter was a little hesitant to do so. And then afterwards, he's kind of wondering, I wonder how that's going to play in the next election, right? And it certainly did play a role. Ronald Reagan, who was running against Jimmy Carter, certainly played it up and said, oh, you too can kiss off Carter. So there's a couple things with this that are just really, really fascinating for me. One is the idea that this is just so strange to us as Americans, the idea of politicians kissing each other. And it reveals the degree to which touching acts or acts of touching are oftentimes or all the time defined by the normative culture. So we have to understand that culture to appreciate the intent and the action itself, right? So we have to understand that. And as we're thinking about, if we circle back to Joe Biden, what we see with Joe Biden is that our normative culture, how we understand touching and appropriate touching, has evolved over time. And to some degree, Joe Biden was left behind. Now, his statement suggests he's willing to listen and he's willing to learn, but we see these are moving targets. They shift over time. So then the deeper question is, what do we as a society do? What does the Biden campaign do? Well, there are a couple options. One of which is just to say, no more touching. Say that these things are really complicated and we don't want to offend somebody, so let's just step back and not do any more touching. Like when you were a kid and you went into the fancy store with your parents and they said, put your hands behind your back, no touching, right? We could move to that. I would suggest that's a kind of a dangerous path. And the reason is human beings crave touch. We need touch. It's in our DNA, right? I mean, it's very powerful. The scientific studies have proven this over and over and over again about the power of touch. Sick newborn babies who are touched get out of the hospital much more quickly. They put on weight much more quickly. The elderly who are alone and not touched oftentimes get much more sick and have much higher mortality rates. They've done study after study. People who are touched by strangers. So if they have a situation where somebody is standing there and a stranger touches them on the shoulder, they find that their stress levels go down and their sense of social exclusion goes down just by a random stranger touching them. Really interesting. My favorite is they've done studies at restaurants. And when the server brings your bill, if the server touches you gently, you tip more because you feel good about the touch. At nursing homes, patients that are touched eat more and have better outcomes. So the simple reality is that we as humans, touch is in our DNA. It's deeply, deeply important to us. Now, does that mean we should tolerate inappropriate touching? Absolutely not. In no way, shape, or form. But it does suggest that we should think about the value of touch. And here's the good news. The good news is you get to write these new norms. You get to write the new rules. Most of the time in politics is always top-down. The political system tells you this is how it's going to be. This is the nature of the rules. This is what healthcare is going to look like. Not in this case. This case, it's bottom-up. This time society gets to tell our political leaders. We get to tell Joe Biden. We get to tell Donald Trump, you can't do that. That's inappropriate. That's very empowering to think that the citizenry, that us, the average individuals, can shape that normative discourse. And so I would, as I close here, I would suggest to you that as we think about how we judge our politicians, I would encourage you to be part of that conversation. Those awkward, uncomfortable conversations about touch, how we should touch each other and what that should look like. But always remember that touch is deeply powerful and transformative. Thank you.